What would you do if your husband stood in the doorway and calmly announced the locks were being changed tonight? That is the moment I found myself frozen, clutching my bag, realizing my little joke about the neighbor had turned into the last straw. My name is Selene Marlowe. I am 34 years old, and I work at an insurance office where my days feel long and tedious. My husband Adrian is 37. He manages properties, always tired from dealing with tenants and repairs, but always steady in his quiet way. We have 2 children, Lila, who is 9, and Ethan, who is 6, both sensitive to every shift in our moods, both smart enough to pick up when the silence grows heavier than words. I had been feeling invisible, convinced that Adrian no longer saw me as the woman he married, so I began craving attention anywhere else I could find it. Our neighbor Julian was friendly, always ready with a smile or a little compliment, and I let myself take it as proof that I was still desirable. Instead of being honest with myself about enjoying the attention, I spun a story where I was the victim, where Julian had been the one trying me, while Adrian sat uselessly in denial. I joked about it at barbecues and dinners, pretending it was humor, but really, I was testing how far I could humiliate Adrian without consequence. My sister Cora warned me I was playing with fire. My mother Elise told me I was brave for speaking so openly, and Adrian stayed silent through it all. I thought his silence meant weakness. I thought I had the upper hand, but his calm expression told me later that he was collecting something stronger than words. The night he said the locks would be changed, I realized too late that silence was not surrender, it was preparation. That first spark came during a barbecue in our backyard, with neighbors and family gathered around plastic tables. I wanted attention, I wanted laughter, so I joked loudly that even Julian, our neighbor, had tried me before. People laughed nervously, some avoided my eyes, but I felt powerful seeing Adrian shrink into silence beside me. I told everyone he always ignored signs, that he lived in denial, and that he was blind to what men around me wanted. Martha, his mother, looked down at her plate, while Leonard stared at Adrian as though waiting for him to finally react. My sister Cora gave a weak smile, clearly uncomfortable, but I waved her off and told her she needed to lighten up. Adrian left his plate untouched, excusing himself quietly, while I continued to chatter as though nothing unusual had happened that evening. When the guests finally left, I found him in the guest room, door closed, light off, refusing to even acknowledge my presence outside. I told myself he was sulking, that he was embarrassed because my words had exposed his weakness in front of everyone. I framed his silence as guilt, as if he had already admitted everything by refusing to defend himself. Later that night, I called my mother Elise and told her Adrian had embarrassed me by hiding like a child instead of standing by my side. She said he was ungrateful and reminded me that men often could not handle strong women who spoke the truth. Her words made me feel justified, so I repeated the story again the next day at work, telling my colleagues that even the neighbor had tried me while Adrian did nothing. A few laughed awkwardly, one muttered that it was disrespectful, but I insisted that I deserved credit for being honest about how men acted. When I returned home, Adrian was in the kitchen preparing the children's lunches with mechanical calm, his lips pressed tight together. I told him he was making me look like a fool by refusing to challenge Julian directly, but he said nothing and carried on slicing apples. That silence infuriated me, so I raised my voice, accusing him of being spineless, yet he simply walked past me carrying the lunchboxes to the refrigerator. Lila later asked why Daddy slept in the guest room and why I was so angry with him. I told her he had hurt my feelings by ignoring me when I tried to be honest, but she frowned and asked if I had maybe hurt him instead. Ethan clung to Adrian that evening, following him to the study, sitting quietly on the floor with his toys while Adrian worked through paperwork. I hated the sight of it because I wanted Adrian to fight me, not retreat into his silence that seemed stronger than my words. That weekend, I mentioned the joke again at another small gathering, insisting that people admired me and that Adrian's refusal to defend himself proved he had no strength. Cora pulled me aside after and warned me seriously that I was destroying my marriage with these games, but I brushed her off and said she was jealous of the attention I always received. When we returned home that night, I passed Adrian's study and heard the faint whirring of the scanner, a sound I had learned to ignore. He was scanning documents into his laptop, placing papers neatly into a thick folder, and when I asked what he was doing, he simply said it was for work. I laughed at him, calling him obsessive, but the calm look on his face unsettled me more than any angry outburst could have. I realized then that his silence was not simple retreat. It was the silence of someone preparing something I had not anticipated. I convinced myself I could control the story by repeating it again and again until it sounded true. At the insurance office, I told colleagues that Julian had made advances, that I had been brave enough to admit it, and that Adrian had done absolutely nothing. Some gave me nervous laughs, others glanced away, but I thrived on the discomfort because it meant I was being noticed. When one coworker said it sounded like disrespect toward Adrian, I countered that a real husband would defend his wife instead of hiding. That night at home, Adrian asked why I spent so much time talking with Julian on the street, but I accused him of being paranoid. I told him he was insecure, that he was trying to control me, and that he looked pathetic, worrying about nothing. He said nothing back. He just picked up his keys and left the room with calm precision. Later, I sent Julian a quick message, just something playful to test his reaction, and he replied with a casual compliment that fueled me. It was harmless, I told myself, just attention, nothing serious, but I knew I was crossing a line. When Cora visited the next afternoon, she noticed how often I checked my phone, and she asked if Julian was worth the trouble. I snapped at her, saying she was jealous because she never had men notice her the way they noticed me. She told me quietly that respect mattered more than attention, but I brushed her off and told her she was boring. That evening, Adrian quietly placed a grocery receipt on the counter, showing purchases near Julian's gym. He asked if I had been there again, and I laughed at him, saying he was obsessive, calling him controlling, insisting he had twisted everything into some strange story. He folded the receipt, slipped it into his growing folder, and returned to the study without another word. The children started to sense something was wrong in the air between us. Lila asked me why Daddy was always in the study instead of sitting with us after dinner. I told her he was sulking because he could not take a joke, but she shook her head and said maybe he was sad instead. Ethan followed Adrian into the study again that night, sitting on the floor with his toy cars, watching quietly while Adrian typed. I hated how much peace there was between them, how his silence drew the children closer while my noise pushed them away. I tried to tilt the story back into my favor by calling my mother Elise. I told her Adrian had started watching me too closely, that he had asked about receipts, and that he seemed obsessed. She said he was cruel, that he was punishing me because he could not handle the truth. Her words gave me strength, so I repeated the story to anyone who would listen, painting myself as the bold wife with an insecure husband. When Martha heard about it through family whispers, she warned Adrian that he should not tolerate my disrespect, which only made me more determined to double down. The final push came at a neighborhood gathering when I once again joked about Julian, laughing that even the neighbor had tried me, and everyone looked to Adrian. He sat quietly, his fork in his hand, his expression steady but unreadable. I told myself his silence meant I had won again, but when I looked closer, his stillness seemed deliberate, like someone waiting for the right time to strike. The next morning, I found a crisp white business card tucked into the pocket of Adrian's jacket, embossed with the name of a law office downtown, and for the first time I wondered if his silence had already moved far beyond me. The restaurant dinner was supposed to be light-hearted, just a small gathering with friends, but I turned it into a stage. I dressed carefully, wanting to prove that I could still turn heads, that I could outshine the quiet man sitting beside me. From the start, I guided the conversation away from simple topics and back toward myself, laughing as I repeated the story that even Julian, our neighbor, had tried me once. The laughter at the table was thin and uncomfortable. Some people shifted in their chairs, others avoided my eyes, but I pushed harder anyway. I said Adrian never defended me, that he ignored everything around him, that his friends and even neighbors admired me while he stayed blind. My words were sharp, designed to sting him, but he sat with his hands folded neatly, face calm and expression unreadable. The silence drove me mad, so I leaned in further, adding details I knew would embarrass him, describing messages I pretended Julian had sent, painting myself as the woman every man wanted. I laughed again, saying Adrian could never compete with that kind of attention, and one of the wives asked if I thought maybe I was being too cruel. I snapped back that it was only a joke, that a confident man would laugh with me, not sulk like a child. Adrian did not react. He simply placed his napkin on the table and excused himself, walking out without even glancing in my direction. His chair sat empty while whispers circled, and I felt the eyes of everyone on me, questioning what kind of wife mocked her husband until he walked away. To cover the shame, I told the table that Adrian was too sensitive, that he always acted like the victim whenever I spoke the truth. Some nodded uncomfortably, but others stared at their plates, unwilling to agree. When I stepped outside after paying the bill, Adrian was already gone, his car missing from the lot. I told myself he was being dramatic, that he would return once he cooled off, but inside my chest a cold panic settled. Later that night, when I came home, I found him in the study again, folder open, pages spread neatly across the desk. He didn't say a word when I entered. He simply highlighted something on a page and slipped it into a plastic sleeve. I demanded to know why he kept hiding behind paperwork instead of talking to me, but he closed the folder quietly and looked at me with the same steady calm. That look scared me more than if he had shouted. The children noticed his absence at the dinner. Lila asked me the next morning why Daddy had left before dessert, why he hadn't said goodbye. I told her he was just tired, that he couldn't handle a silly joke, but she frowned and said he looked sad. Ethan clung to Adrian more tightly than before, refusing to sit with me at breakfast, hiding behind his father's chair instead. I tried to laugh it off, saying children always sided with the parent who spoiled them, but deep down I knew Adrian had their quiet loyalty in a way I never could. Cora called me the following day and said bluntly that I was destroying myself. She told me Adrian's silence was not weakness, it was strategy, and that he was already gathering everything he needed. I told her she was being dramatic, that she didn't understand what it was like to live with a man who refused to fight back. She said nothing after that, only sighed heavily before hanging up, and her silence reminded me of Adrian's, which unsettled me even more. That evening, while I was cleaning up the kitchen, my phone buzzed. It was a short message from Adrian, just a few words telling me he had spoken to a lawyer. My hands shook as I read it, and I dropped the dishcloth on the counter. For the first time, his silence had turned into words I couldn't twist, words that carried weight heavier than anything I had joked about. I ran to the study to confront him, but the door was locked, and through the gap beneath I could see the glow of his lamp on that thick folder, the shadow of his pen moving steadily across the page. The following weekend, we went to Adrian's parents' house for Sunday dinner, and I convinced myself it would be the perfect chance to set the story straight. I rehearsed lines in the car, planning to paint him as sulking and humorless, while presenting myself as the bold truth-teller. Martha welcomed us warmly. Leonard sat in his usual chair, and Cora had already arrived, her expression wary as she helped set the table. The children ran inside, eager to see their grandparents, their laughter echoing down the hall while I steadied my mask. As soon as we sat down, I launched into my performance, saying Adrian had been avoiding me all week, that he could not handle a simple joke, that he punished me with silence instead of honesty. I went further, claiming Julian had made me uncomfortable with his attention, and that I had bravely spoken up while Adrian did nothing. I said his weakness embarrassed me, that I felt abandoned in my own marriage, that a husband should protect his wife instead of hiding in the study. Martha looked uneasy, but tried to nod supportively, while Leonard's eyes hardened as he listened in silence. Cora shifted uncomfortably, and I could already tell she wanted to call me out, but she kept quiet for the moment. Adrian sat beside me, calm as ever, eating his food without interruption, letting me dig deeper with every word I spoke. When Leonard finally spoke, his words cut sharply. He said humiliating a man repeatedly was not honesty, it was cruelty, and that I was playing with fire by mocking Adrian in public. My face burned, but I laughed it off, telling him Adrian could speak for himself if he had a problem. Yet Adrian did not. He simply looked at me for a long moment before turning back to his plate. The silence pressed heavier than anything, leaving me exposed in the space where his defense should have been. The children sensed the tension. Lila asked me quietly why everyone was upset, why I was angry at Daddy again. I told her he was sulking because he could not laugh at my words, but she frowned and whispered that maybe I had hurt him instead. Ethan climbed onto Adrian's lap and leaned against his chest, and the image of them together made me feel like the outsider in my own family. I hated it, so I pushed harder. I accused Adrian of using silence as control, of twisting everything to make me look guilty, of hiding behind paperwork while I carried the burden of honesty. He did not reply. After dinner, Cora pulled me aside and told me plainly that I was destroying myself. She said Adrian's silence was not weakness, it was evidence gathering, and that when he finally spoke, it would not be in my favor. I told her she was siding with him, that she was jealous of the attention I received, but she shook her head sadly and said she would not defend me anymore. Her words rattled me, but I covered it with pride, storming back into the dining room and continuing my act. Adrian rose from the table without finishing dessert, retrieved a thick folder from the car, and walked out the front door without a word. I followed, demanding to know where he was going, but he ignored me completely, climbing into the car and driving away, while Leonard stood on the porch with his arms folded. My mother called me later that night, and I told her Adrian had embarrassed me in front of his parents, that he was trying to make me look like the villain. She told me he was cruel, but her voice lacked the conviction it once carried, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. The next morning, a courier arrived at the door with a sealed envelope addressed to me, bearing the stamp of Adrian's lawyer, and as I held it in my shaking hands, I realized his silence had finally begun to speak in a language I could not control. The envelope sat on the counter untouched for hours before I finally opened it, and inside were words that made my stomach turn. Financial separation, custody filings, protective measures for the children. I could hardly breathe as I read them, my hands trembling while Ethan tugged at my sleeve asking for breakfast. When Adrian returned that evening, I waved the papers in his face, demanding to know if he truly meant to tear our family apart. He remained calm, saying only that he was protecting Lila and Ethan, and that everything would be handled fairly. I shouted that he was paranoid, that I had only been honest, that he was punishing me for speaking truths he refused to face. He did not answer. He simply packed Ethan's school bag, set it by the door, and left me standing in the kitchen with my rage echoing off the walls. The next humiliation came at the grocery store, when my card was declined again and again at the register, people behind me sighing as I fumbled for another. I abandoned half the cart, cheeks burning, and drove home with nothing but shame. Checking my account later, I discovered my access had been revoked completely, my name removed, my financial freedom gone. I stormed into the study to confront him, accusing him of trying to starve me into submission. But he told me calmly to call the lawyer if I had questions. That composure made me angrier than shouting ever could. I called my mother Elise immediately, crying that Adrian was punishing me, that he had taken everything from me. She said he was cruel, she lent me cash, but even her reassurance rang hollow in my ears. Cora, on the other hand, refused to help, telling me Adrian had every right to protect himself and the children after the things I had said. I accused her of betrayal, but her silence matched Adrian's, and I could feel the support around me slipping away. The children began asking questions. Lila wanted to know why I could not buy her new shoes, and I told her Daddy had locked the money away. She frowned and asked if Daddy would buy them instead. Ethan clung to Adrian constantly, following him into the study, sitting with his toys at his feet while Adrian worked on his paperwork. I told myself the children were too young to understand, but deep down, I knew they already recognized who provided stability and who created chaos. One evening, Tom, one of Adrian's friends, came by. Adrian handed him a folder right in front of me, and when I demanded to know what it contained, Tom only shook his head. Later, I overheard them in the garage, their voices low, but clear enough for me to hear words like custody arrangement and documented behavior. My blood ran cold as I realized Adrian was preparing to take the children from me legally. I barged in, accusing them both of plotting, but Adrian told me calmly the court would decide everything. His tone so steady it cut deeper than any argument. By the end of that week, I felt cornered. My finances were gone. My parents were beginning to doubt me. My sister had turned away. And even Ruth, who had once defended me, now said gently that perhaps I should stop before it was too late. Friends who once nodded along now avoided my calls, unwilling to be pulled into the storm. My voice, once loud enough to drown Adrian's silence, now felt like it was echoing against walls that had already closed in. The final blow came in the form of a second envelope, stamped by the court, listing a hearing date for custody. My throat tightened as I read it, the words swimming before my eyes, while Ethan played with toy cars at my feet. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself Adrian was bluffing, but the dates and signatures told me the truth. His silence had carried him farther than my noise ever could. On the morning of the hearing, Adrian left the house early, folder under his arm, Lila and Ethan holding his hands, and he did not even glance back at me as the door closed behind them. The courthouse felt like another world, quiet and sharp, where nothing I said could bend the rules. My mother sat beside me, whispering that I was brave, that Adrian was overreacting, that the judge would see through his act. Her words sounded small against the steady shuffle of papers and the measured tone of Adrian's lawyer. Adrian himself sat calm, his folder neatly stacked before him, his eyes on the judge, never once turning to look at me. That silence felt like a wall I could not break through, stronger than any argument I had rehearsed. The lawyer began with receipts, laying out charges from Julian's gym, dates and times that matched my absences, highlighting them with precision that made my stomach twist. Then came the screenshots, my casual messages to Julian, words I had told myself were harmless, but now looked damning under the fluorescent courtroom lights. Each message projected on the screen seemed heavier than the last, proof that my jokes had been more than just jokes, evidence I could no longer deny. I tried to protest, insisting the context was missing, that it was harmless banter, but the judge asked me to remain quiet until it was my turn. When the lawyer moved to the testimonies, the weight grew unbearable. Tom confirmed hearing my jokes at dinners. Sophie explained how I twisted stories, and even Martha admitted she had begun to doubt me. Each voice felt like another betrayal, stripping away the version of events I had carefully constructed. My mother wept softly beside me. My father sat stiff and silent, while Cora looked away entirely, refusing to defend me anymore. When it was finally my chance to speak, I told the court that Adrian was punishing me for being honest, that I had only ever spoken the truth, that Julian's attention had been exaggerated. I said Adrian was insecure, that he had twisted innocent remarks into evidence against me. The words tumbled out, but they sounded thin, flimsy against the careful order of Adrian's lawyer. The judge listened with a flat expression, her pen scratching notes, giving no sign of sympathy. Then came the discussion of the children. The judge asked who had provided stability, who had shielded them from conflict, who had acted in their best interest. Adrian's lawyer described his client's quiet consistency, his refusal to drag the children into arguments, his steady routines for school and bedtime. He contrasted it with my loud accusations, my jokes in front of family, my tendency to use Lila and Ethan as shields in my quarrels. My chest burned as I remembered Lila's frown when she said maybe I had hurt Daddy, Ethan's small figure clinging to Adrian's side while I shouted. Those moments now stood in the courtroom like witnesses themselves. The ruling was swift. Temporary custody granted to Adrian. My visitation limited and supervised until further review. Financial control shifted to his name for stability. The gavel sounded like a door slamming shut, and I sat frozen, unable to breathe. I wanted to scream that it was unfair, that the truth had been twisted, but the judge had already moved on to the next case. My protest no longer mattered here. Adrian stood, thanked the court politely, and gathered his folder. He did not look at me, he did not speak, he simply walked out with the same steady steps he had carried all along. Lila and Ethan were waiting in the hallway with Martha and Leonard, and they reached for his hands immediately, clinging to him with a trust that crushed me. He led them down the courthouse steps without a glance back, his silence final and complete. I followed behind slowly, clutching my empty bag, watching the locksmith's van pull up outside our home that same evening, tools ready in hand, while Adrian unlocked the door for him without ever meeting my eyes. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city are you watching.